Everybody, this is Josh for another episode of the Solopreneur Grind Podcast. Very happy to be joined today by Bill Huang. Bill, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Very happy to be here.
Bill, can you start with a quick introduction, a little bit more about who you are and what you're working on these days?
Sure. So my name is Bill Huang. I am a software developer by trade who kind of moved up into software leadership from a financial background. So I've been doing this software game for quite a long time. And then in 2019, just right before COVID happened, I'd spent about 13 years as a CIO for a mid-market medical bill review company, kind of insurance services, a very technical, very niche kind of place. And we got bought by one of our biggest customers, and they basically decided they didn't want to further invest in the software. So I lost my situation right before COVID happened. And the biggest part about that was, at not 28, let's say, things with COVID and everything got a little sporty. And so during my time as a CIO, I didn't really develop software. That was actually one of the smartest decisions I ever made, was not to write code on my own products and kind of keep myself above the fray, if you will. And so then I got back into writing code, and I'm happy to talk more about that in a second. But that's basically my background. I'm a software focused entrepreneur. I won't say solopreneur. I started that way, but we're a little bit past that now.
For sure. And depending on the person, that's usually, or sometimes the evolution. Some people prefer to just stay alone forever. Some people may, hire a couple people, keep a small team, have some contractors, et cetera, et cetera. But can you walk us through that stage right around COVID, and you're thinking about what your next step is? Walk us
Yeah.
through a
So,
little bit of that process and like what made you decide to pull the trigger on solopreneurship?
well, it was frankly, partly fear based. At a more advanced age, I was not getting a lot of traction in the job market, and COVID killed everybody's job prospects for at least 12 months. So I wasn't going to sit around and just watch Netflix. And
Mm.
so I started reevaluating, what am I going to do? I was pretty good as a coder back in the day. And I just got back into writing code. So I needed a project. And I met, one of my hobbies is guitar playing. So I met a guy on the internet who had a guitar business whose technology was, let's just say, substandard. And I decided to partner with him and, build this guitar platform. And that platform is currently called, it's called 10xguitar.com. And we are kind of on hiatus right now. We've got a platform built, but we're not able to really invest in growing it right now. And he's got his distractions. I've got my distractions, but that is one of the businesses I got going. But that got my coding chops back, and I realized that I was still good at it. I totally changed my approach to code and software tech stacks and everything. And that's one of the things that I've carried through from the corporate world. Is I would describe myself as a hyper focused driver of margins. When I got hired as a CIO, I was determined to drive high margins into the business through software automation. And because of that, we ended up selling the company twice for about $120 million. So it was a good exit for the investors. I made a lot of money for investors. Unfortunately, I didn't make that much for myself, but it was still a fantastic experience.
Got it. And you mentioned some other, some distractions slash other businesses. Can you talk
Sure.
a little bit about what those are and how they came to be?
Absolutely. So I've got basically, let me count them. I've got 3 products in 2 companies, all software developed by me individually alone as a solopreneur. And so the smartest thing I did was connect with somebody who was way better than I was at the business side of things and the selling side of things. I mean, as a CIO, you've got to be good at business. So it's not that I'm not good at business, but I'm not the guy that's going to call up somebody, who you hadn't talked to for 5 years and say, "Hey, buy my product." I'm not that guy. I will talk your ear off at a party or on a podcast or something like that, but I'm not the guy that's going to be going and selling it. I'm really good at supporting the sales process from a here's why this product is good perspective. But anyway, so we came up with I was doing some consulting with a guy I met on LinkedIn. His name is Xavier Egan. He has a company called Capital Asset Advisors, Capital Asset Technology. And he's the exact opposite of me. He's got a bit of a business background. He's got a huge business background. He comes from a CFO background, and he's got a little technical background. He did a little bit of database work back in the day. So he speaks jive, so to speak. But he and I partnered up and did a little consulting. And in our consulting travels, we realized that there was not a good way to track the contracts for an organization. And my view of an organization is if you understand the contracts, you understand every obligation that organization is required to uphold. And so we built a company called Contract Sage, and we use AI to basically shred the contract and tell you all kinds of insights about the contract in a repeatable fashion, using AI. So Contract Sage is in the process of, we're working on a crowdfunding campaign right now to try to raise some money with that. We've got a couple of paying customers, but we're not really, killing it yet, because it's the challenge with that business is that most people don't understand that they need contract management. So you have to create the need, that you have to explain to them why they need this and so on. So that's a bit of a challenge. But anyway, Contract Sage led to a spinoff that we call Policy Sage. And so Xavier was talking to some of the political people here in Texas and realized that, they track legislative bills. And so he called me up one day and said, "Can we do that?" And I said, "Yeah, we sure can." And so we built another app called Policy Sage. I literally took the code and spun the code completely off into a different thing called Policy Sage. And Policy Sage is really our hottest prospect right now. We're in talks with a number of jurisdictions around here, large jurisdictions for, enterprise level sales to that thing. So we're pretty excited about that.
That's great.
And then I got one more of that. So in trying to figure out how to monetize all this work that I had done, and that's really the challenge that I'm still kind of working on, is how to monetize all this work. But Xavier wanted to take the 10X software that I built, which is basically a learning management system that delivers video content and does, it has a social media component about it, a social platform type stuff about it. And anyway, we decided that would be useful for helping athletes. So he's got a lot of connections to former professional athletes. Michelle Carter, who's an Olympic gold medalist in 2016 in the shot put, he knows all these people. And he knew that, we identified the situation that athletes are really not well served by the professional sports business. And many times an athlete will, not be the smartest in their financial decisions and make, I'll say, make some dumb decisions with their money. And so we saw a need for an education platform. So we repurposed the 10X platform into a company called Taft. It's today's athlete for tomorrow. And we built basically a matching algorithm that matches athletes of all levels to businesses who want to engage those athletes for, appearances or social media posts, or it's a sports marketing thing. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's going well too. But again, we're just getting started with getting revenue going.
Got it. I mean, one thing that definitely stands out and that I would recommend too is, if you're very strong in some areas, finding a partner who's really strong in the other areas, so that, the two halves make a whole, can actually be a great idea. Now, Bill, thinking of the multiple businesses and kind of where they've come, can you talk about, if someone's listening right now, maybe they're thinking about starting a similar business, or they're still early on, what would you say are 3 to 5 key steps that they should take to kind of get the business from 0 to 1?
Well, let me just start by saying what I advise not to do. And that's what I did. Now, I've spent a lot of years writing software that will never see the light of day, because I kind of have if your only tool is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And my favorite tool is software. And my favorite approach is to drive high margins through software automation. So I'm always looking for software, and I've got ideas coming at me all the time for how to write new software. And I get kind of enamored with the problem. I like solving problems. And, yeah, you can write code and it's fun. And I've spent years writing software, literally years of nights and weekends writing software that never saw the light of day. So my advice is to identify the market first, identify requirements first. If you're going to build software, I can't speak to, you know, well, I think it applies in general, right? You want to
Hmm.
know that there's a demand for what you're going to build or create before you spend the time creating it. And the second thing I would say is you've got to be ruthless, and I mean ruthless, in assessing the need for another feature. Do you really need to build it? Because the quickest way to build software is, or to deliver software is not to build it. So, it's, that's kind of one of the things I learned as a CIO. I was very much the guy that said, why do we need to do this? If we don't need to do it, we're not going to do it. We're not going to bloat the software with a bunch of stuff that nobody, that one person thought was important and nobody else is going to use. And so I would say that. And I would also say that your point a minute ago about finding people to complement your skill set is absolutely true. However, from a technical founder's perspective, you got to be careful because there are a lot of people out there who would glom onto somebody like me as a technical founder and basically expect you to deliver the company. I've got this great idea, and if you write all this software for me and spend all your nights and weekends writing software, then I'll maybe sell it. And there's a real imbalance there. So if you're looking for a business person, you need somebody with contacts and money. Okay. Because the truth about this stuff is nobody's going to pay you to deliver software. The companies that go out there and raise millions of dollars to go build a platform, well, it's never happened to me. Let's put it that way. So it's a lot of work to build software, even for people who know how to do it. I think one of my biggest gifts in the world is the ability to think of something and then create something from nothing by sitting down at a blank screen and typing stuff. And, that said, just because you know how to build it doesn't mean you know how long it's going to take to build it. Doesn't mean you know all the details that have to be built to do it. And once a customer gets their hands on it, there's all kinds of things that happen. One of the truths of software is when a user gets their hand on your software, they're going to use it in ways that you have no way of imagining as you're building it. And that's both good and bad.
Absolutely. And I also kind of love how your first point connects well with one of your last points, which is one way to test that relationship with that business partner who says they can sell it is go try to sell it first. Like you said at the beginning, prove that there's actually a market out there, people who are willing to pay for it. And then once they or you can prove that people are willing to pay, then go spend the time to build it. What would
Yeah.
you say, Bill, has been the hardest part so far of navigating this entrepreneurial journey?
I would say that, we touched on this a minute ago in our pre-call, but the idea of being alone, it's my biggest pain point from losing my situation in corporate America was I lost my team. I spent inordinate amounts of time and effort nurturing that team and building that team up. I had people with me that stuck with me for 13 years, and that is unheard of in the software space. I'm not Google. I wasn't paying like Google. And I had a core team. And so it was like a piece of my heart got cut out, to be a little dramatic about it. And so being alone, you don't really have anybody to bounce your ideas off of. And that's why Xavier and I work so well together, is because we are really good at bouncing ideas around each other, and that you get that give and take of, well, we could do this or we could do this, and that means this. And he'll say one thing, and I'm like, no, dude, no, that means you got to do this, 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 and this. And we do this kind of back and forth, which is very much the most fun I have in software. Is the design part. The building part is pretty tedious sometimes, but the actual designing, we could do that. That would be cool. And so that's the biggest thing. And then the fact of the matter is that I think entrepreneurship, I think people get an idea in their head that, oh, I want to be my own boss. I want to be, an entrepreneur. And that's great. I support that. I encourage that. But you got to be ruthless in assessing your own capabilities, which is, my daughter's just turned 30. And she's kind of going through the same thing. She truly is a solopreneur trying to do all this stuff herself. And she's struggling a bit, to be candid. And, it's it's a lot harder than people think it is, just because you see that, oh yeah, I could make a business out of nothing and I should make a business out of nothing. Doesn't mean it's going to be that easy. And not to discourage anyone, but you got to be ruthless in analyzing yourself. Are you really a self-starter? Are you going to work? I mean, I've kind of got a thing with myself, the game I played. When I lost my situation, it was September 10th, 2019. And I've worked every day since then, literally every day since then. And I'm going to take a day off when I relieve the pressure on my family. And until I relieve the pressure on my family, I'm not going to take a day off. Now, that doesn't mean I work 16 hours every day for 5 years, but I'm pretty focused and I'm pretty disciplined. And I really believe that is a requirement.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think those are great points. My last question for you, Bill, is what's one key piece of advice then that you'd give for solopreneurs? Maybe they're early in the journey, maybe they're thinking about starting, maybe they're thinking of leaving corporate. What's one piece of advice you'd give to them?
I would just say, be ruthless in your self-evaluation. Really develop the skill to analyze yourself. You don't have to share it with anybody, but you got to be able to spot your own BS, or your own blind spots. And, I would just say also try to develop a mentorship situation with somebody who's done it or somebody who's more experienced than you are, because I was fortunate. The way I got into software was because of a mentor. I worked my first job out of school was in the defense business. And I worked on a missile program that's now the PAC-3 Patriot missile when it was a development project. And I met a bunch of really talented engineers. And one of them was a software engineer who I took a class from. And I decided I was going to learn C programming kind of as a hobby. And he took me under his wing. He recognized that I had capabilities and I was kind of crazy about it. And it was like eating peanuts, one thing led to another. And he was like, okay, let's do this. And he really took me under his wing and beat me hard for about 6 months on C programming. I got to be a professional level C programmer in about 6 months of concerted effort. And I went and got a job writing code. And that's how back then that was late 80s. And I thought that I had to get a master's degree to get a job. And so I went back to school and I did, 21 hours of master's work for computer science and realized that wasn't really helping me get better. Yeah, I was learning stuff, but I mean, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so I stopped that and self-directed. And anyway, long, strange trip this has been, but I'll close by saying that losing my situation hurt a lot. I'm still trying to deal with it. And mainly, without question, it's a blessing more than a curse. It gave me the impetus in my late 50s to really go out on my own, because my options were limited at that point. And, I haven't had a lot of success, getting consulting gigs and doing that kind of work. I've done some of it and I'm good at that, but I mean, it's much more, that's a racket in the sense that you've got to always be selling and always be looking for your next engagement. And I just don't like doing that work. And so, you've got to, if you're going to do it by yourself, you got to be pretty well-rounded.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, educate yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really hard truth that, hits when you start. And the other thing that I've kind of learned along those same lines is sometimes it feels terrible in the short term, but
Mm-hmm.
like you said, everything happens for a reason. Or you didn't say that, but you were kind
But
of
no,
hinting at it. And
I agree. I agree with that 100%. And
yeah.
I wouldn't do it any differently. This is what I've all wanted my entire life. And I was not, I mean, I've got a, family and I've got a long-term marriage that I've been in, and I've been married to the same woman for 35 years. And, I don't, I'm not blowing that up just cause, I want to go play entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quitting my 6-figure job to go start a company and take all that risk unless it was forced on me. And
Mm-hmm.
so my strategy, however flawed it may have been, was to try to do both at the same time and try to work nights and weekends and all that stuff. And I did okay with it, but I don't know that I would try that again.
Right.
I mean, because I still went through my entire 401k. I still went through all my savings. I'm still, working to get back on my feet financially after COVID. So I was thinking about this last night about what we would talk about, and I realized that I'm still kind of trying to get out of COVID.
Right.
So
Yeah. I mean, many are, right?
yeah.
So,
So
yeah,
I took that lockdown and I got super focused and I went nuts on it. And I'm looking forward to coming out of it. So is my family.
absolutely. Well, Bill, this has been really interesting. Your stories, your lessons, all that kind of stuff has been great. If people do want to get in touch with you or maybe learn more about some of those different companies, where do you recommend that they go?
I've got some links. Let's see, we'll start with 10xguitar.com. We have contractsage.com, policy-sage.com, and growtaft.com. And then you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm more than happy to network with people or communicate or share more of my story. Or if people have specific questions, I'm happy to engage. And I want to leave real quick thought, which is my best advice about doing any of this is be a good networker. Don't be one of those people that's an opportunistic networker that says, "Oh, how can you help me? Great, I want to be in your network." I'm pretty disillusioned with LinkedIn because I've got, I don't know, 1,000 connections or something on LinkedIn. And there may be 3 people that I actually can network with, that I could
Hmm.
actually reach out to and have a communication with, that don't think I'm trying to sell them or are just not trying to sell me something. So, be a good networker, because your network is your net worth. And I learned that the hard way. If I'd had a better network, I think I might have landed a little more softly from my situation. But, you know, it is what it is. And you know, I'm, I'm pleased to be where I am and looking forward to growing these companies. And sorry, had another thought real quick and I'll stop,
Hmm.
but you got to be careful about spreading yourself too thin. And I will fully admit that I'm at the edge of these things, because I'll pop into the code and I'm bouncing around between all this different code, and it's very challenging. But it didn't start out that way. I didn't start out to shotgun focus. I think focus is incredibly important. And be clear on what you want and go get it.
Absolutely. That's a great note to end on. Bill, thank you so much again. We're going to have links to those 4 different companies in the description, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. Bill, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Great pleasure. Thank you.